The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending where you are in the world, and welcome to this webinar on transitioning to a circular economy. How can producers, government, and consumers join forces to make a change? I'm Melina Diamantopoulou, Head of Production at Climate Action. Thank you for joining us, and it's a pleasure to welcome so many listeners to this webinar. We have received over 1,000 registrations and a testament to the excellent speakers we have participating and sharing their thoughts and experiences in this important topic. Please be aware this session is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you shortly after the webinar is complete, so you will be able to listen to it again and share it with your peers. Just to let you know about climate action, for the last 10 years we have worked in a unique partnership with the United Nations Environment to develop their official publication and events with the aim to establish partnerships between the public and the private sector to accelerate international sustainable development and advance the green economy. Today's webinar takes place ahead of the 8th Sustainable Innovation Forum, the largest business-focused event held alongside the annual Conference of Parties, this year in Bonn, Germany. The Sustainable Innovation Forum brings together more than 600 carefully hand-picked delegates, including Ministers of Energy and Climate Change, blue-chip CEOs, mayors, responsible investors, development banks, green entrepreneurs and media, for 2 packed days of capacity building, networking, collaboration and deal-making that will galvanize and fast-track the green economy. Speakers for this year include Erik Solheim, Executive Director of the UN Environment, Climate Change, Energy and Forestry Ministers from the likes of Denmark, Australia, Ethiopia, Finland, Maldives, Norway and more, a host of city mayors and many more. For more information on the speakers and the forum, please visit the website at www.cop-23.com. Which brings me to today's webinar on transitioning to a circular economy. Over the next hour, we will explore the following questions and more. Can the context of waste be eliminated? What is the business, economic, regulatory, and cultural shift needed to achieve this? If circular economy is worth billions to business, why has it not picked up yet? Which are the most sustainable business models to create a platform that fosters sharing communities? How can direct purchasing decisions of consumers be influenced? How can producers, consumers, and the government join forces to make a change? I feel extremely privileged to welcome 4 excellent speakers with significant experience to address this topic. So I would like to welcome Louise McGregor, Head of Circular Economy at Zero Waste Scotland, Dr. Colin Church, CEO of the Chartered Institution of Waste Management, Judd Austrian, Lead of the Global Centre of Competence for Circular Economy at IBM, and Brendon Edgerton, Manager of Circular Economy at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Each speaker will take a few minutes to present their views, following which we will take questions from our listeners. You can submit your questions via Twitter using the hashtag #SIF17 or using the question box on the GoToWebinar bar to the right of your screen. Don't be shy, we will try to get through as many relevant questions as possible in the hour time frame. And with that, I shall hand over to our first speaker for the day, Louise McGregor, as I said, Head of Circular Economy at Zero Waste Scotland, who has 15 years experience in resource management, working for the Waste and Resources Action Programme for 13 of those years. In 2007, Louise took responsibility for delivering a significant food waste reprocessing capacity in Scotland, and over the last 3 years, Louise has led the Zero Waste Scotland Circular Economy Programme, helping to deliver the evidence base for the circular economy in Scotland as part of Team Scotland and supporting the issue for the Scottish Government's circular economy strategy in February 2016. Louise is now focused on increasing the levels of reuse, repair and remanufacturing in Scotland and developing the circular economy solutions with the businesses. Hi, Louise. Can you hear us?
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everybody, and hello from Scotland. And thank you very much for your introduction. This afternoon I'm just going to take you briefly through a short introduction to Zero Waste Scotland, a little bit about the policy context here in Scotland, kind of emphasising the role of the government in Scotland. And then I'm going to explain a little bit about the work that Zero Waste Scotland is doing in particular, helping to support businesses. And I'll include a couple of case studies in that, which will help us tease out a little bit of some of the challenges we've found and some of the successes as well. So I'm just going to see if I can work out how to get my presentation moving.
I think if you just click on the presentation, it should be good to go. There you go.
Right. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Right, so just to set the scene then a little bit about Zero Waste Scotland. We are completely funded by the Scottish Government through their Zero Waste team and their energy team. And also we've got significant regional development funding from Europe as well, which is supporting our work. And we are really all about valuing resources and helping Scotland to become a society where resources are valued and nothing's wasted. And you can see our goal there on the screen. And we're really there to help the government deliver its circular economy strategy and really reap the benefits of that for Scotland through economic, social and environmental benefits. So I thought it was helpful just to give you a little bit of a flavour of the kind of the policy context in Scotland, really to show what the government's vision is in Scotland. The circular economy strategy, Making Things Last, was issued last February 2016 after a significant amount of kind of evidence building that the government did with a number of stakeholders, including ourselves and the enterprise agencies and SEPA. And this document very much sets out Scottish Government's priorities in moving towards a circular economy. It identifies the key sectors and the priority areas, and that's based on the evidence. So those priority areas are manufacturing, food and drink, and the bioeconomy, construction and energy infrastructure. And it very much builds on the zero waste and resource efficiency agendas. So you'll find things about recycling and waste minimisation in there, but it also talks about design and reuse and repair and the sharing economy. The other thing to note really is that it's very much an across government document. So although it was published through the policy team, the waste policy team in government, it's got the buy-in from teams across government, and also the circular economy objectives within this document are reflected in Scotland's economic strategy and also in our manufacturing action plan. So I think it shows the leadership there that the Scottish Government is taking with regard to the circular economy. So just moving on a little bit to our objectives, Zero Waste Scotland's objectives, and our goal is really about accelerating a circular economy. So we do that by both working with partners to influence their behaviours, but also providing direct support to the business sector. And because we've got money from the Regional Development Fund in Europe, that's very much focused on small and medium-sized businesses in Scotland. So we are working very much in partnership, particularly with the enterprise agencies, and that recognises really that although we have got support to offer to businesses, we are a small organisation and we can't possibly support every single business in Scotland. So actually working in partnership with the enterprise agencies allows us to make that footprint a lot bigger and integrate really that circular economy approach within the mainstream support that those agencies are offering. So we do have a wealth of circular economy knowledge and expertise that we've built up both through the evidence work we've done and also some pre-runners to the business models and business service that we're offering now. So we ran a business models programme for 2 years, so I'll be touching on that a little bit later. And yeah, we're about sort of stimulating, embedding circular approaches with our partners and within Scottish businesses. And really our objective is to showcase what's possible and to really build awareness of the circular economy, but particularly for businesses to show them what the benefits are practically and the difference it can make to their to individual businesses. So we have two basic strands of support. The first is our circular economy business support service, and that's bespoke service really for businesses where we work directly with SMEs, both individually and as collaborations. And we really help businesses at all stages, both to kind of identify circular opportunities, but also to help them make the business case, perhaps to do some market assessment work for them. and help them in the business planning. This is pictorially what it looks like. So there's elements around innovation, helping businesses to innovate, helping them to look at the markets and what the markets require, doing modelling, whether that be financial modelling or cost-benefit analysis for them, and helping them just with implementing change within their business. And then almost getting them ready for funding as well, whether that's direct funding through another package of support that we can offer, or directly from some commercial organisations. So really trying to move them along the development pathway and help them to be business ready. So I've got a couple of examples really, and these both examples were both supported through our business models programme, which was the pre-runner to this service that we've recently launched. And we very much used the learnings and the experience of working with business to inform the support that we offer going forward. So the first example is a textile one. This was the business Elizabeth Martin Tweed, and they were looking at a garment leasing scheme, either kind of a long-term leasing scheme or for occasional rental. So it's high quality clothing, it's clothing that's made to last, and they felt it was suitable for looking at some sort of leasing approach. So we helped them to do some market research, looking at what the scope was for that, with developing a financial model and working with partners, retailers and what have you that could help them publicise their service. And we helped them run and monitor a pilot. So we found a few challenges with that. It was a startup company and a sole trader, and that gave certain challenges in terms of the capacity. And it was quite an ambitious model. And I think what we learned from that was that actually helping perhaps a slightly larger company look at perhaps one element of their business rather than trying to develop their whole business plan around this new model. So looking at it as one element. We can touch on that a bit later. A second example is Revive, and this was looking at extracting value from waste coffee grounds to use for high value applications. And we supported this small business with helping them develop business plans, facilitation of workshops, and helping them with an action plan to secure finance. And again, some of the challenges we found here was the kind of the flexibility. They'd come up with a good idea, but actually needed to be quite flexible around how they would apply that in a commercial setting. And the effectiveness and the capacity of the team was quite key there as well. And we helped them develop their team. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour of the types of business we're supporting from across a lot of different sectors. And just to finish, I also wanted to mention the second package of support that we do have, which is an investment fund. So the intention is that the service and the work that we provide, helping businesses to identify opportunities and get them investment ready, we can then begin to support them through direct funding. So we have up to £1 million per company available under a scheme that's running till the end of next year, really about commercialising and putting kit on the ground and helping businesses to step up and actually deliver commercial or demonstration models of their basically their new circular approach. So I hope that's given you a little bit of flavour of the work we're doing, how it fits in with government strategy, and a couple of examples of things that we've done to date. Thank you for listening and look forward to your questions later.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. We'll surely have more questions following your presentation at the end of the presentations during the Q&A session. To our listeners, please remember that you can submit your questions over Twitter or through the GoToWebinar question box. If you have any questions for Louise or the next speakers, please do let us know and we will go over them, as many as we can, at least at the end of the presentations. I would now like to welcome Colin Church, Chief Executive of CIWM, the professional body for resources and waste management. Prior to that, Colin spent over 20 years in government working on a range of environmental and economic policies, including resource and waste management. He is also a member of the Newcastle Waste Commission and chair of the Green Alliance Circular Economy Task Force. Hi, Colin.
Hi.
Can you hear us all right?
Thanks very much.
Brilliant.
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Brilliant. So let me just give you access to the mouse so you can manage your presentation, and then we can start.
Okay, I don't seem to be able to move things forward. So.
No, there's unfortunately, it seems like I cannot give you access to the mouse. I apologize, but you can just let me know when you're ready to move slides, and we'll try to fix it during the presentation. If it's fixed, I will let you know, but I will be moving the slides forward for you.
Okay, so if you could go on to the first one, please. Let's say thank you very much indeed for asking me to present to this webinar. CIWM is the body for people who work in the resource and waste management industry, primarily in the UK and Ireland, but actually we have members across the whole of the world. And it's a professional body that looks to promote the standards. I thought the thing that I would do for us all is to set a bit of context, talk a bit about the opportunities, challenges, and then some thoughts about what that all means. So if I could press again, please. We're in a difficult point of development where we have a lot of issues coming at us around energy, water, food, and of course around all of this climate change. And so how we manage our resources is going to be a key and difficult issue. Next slide, please. What I've got here is just some slides that show you the scale of the problem. This is a slide to show the physical extraction of materials over the recent past, and as you can see, it's going on a very steep upwards trajectory. Next, please. We're also seeing greater and greater volatility of commodity prices. This is a graph from the Reserve Bank of Australia. You could get similar graphs on similar ranges of commodities from lots of other places. Next, please. And then this is a graph from UNEP, and what this is showing us along the bottom is the United Nations Human Development Index, how civilized, how wealthy, how well off a country is. And on the right-hand side is the ecological footprint of countries. And you'll see that down in the bottom right-hand corner is the space where really we all want to be, high HDI, but within the Earth's ecological limits. And as you can see, there's virtually nobody in that space. You can also tell from the color coding, rich countries tend to take more than their fair share of resources. Poor countries tend to take less than their fair share of resources. This is clearly a problem for us all. Next slide, please. And what we need to be doing is moving away from the take, make, use, lose approach to economy. To the next slide, please. To a more circular economy. And people will be familiar with that kind of diagram. Trying to be resource efficient and circular and minimize the amount of waste coming out of society. Next slide, please. And of course, this has been recognized at the UN level as well. Sustainable Goal number 12 has a number of sub-elements around resource waste management and so on. Please. So, there are some big opportunities to moving towards a more circular economy. Here are just two studies that have been done over the past period of time, and you can see some very, very large numbers. The UK economic value of a more circular economy could be as much as £75 billion. Globally, that could, Europe, could be 1.8 trillion euros. Significant potential wins in terms of the economy and associated with that jobs and so on. And then next slide, please. The other point, of course, and with gratitude to Zero Waste Scotland, from whom I used this slide, everything that we do to reduce the amount of resources used can help us to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases associated with it. So, lots of reasons we should be in this space, lots of opportunities that can come from this space, economic, environmental, and indeed social. So what are the challenges? And the next slide just shows you a few of the challenges that we have. And this is just taking the UK as an example. Our population's richer, growing, older, and travelling more. And this is changing what people are prepared to accept, want to accept, need to accept. The next slide can show us some of the challenges of technology. We've got remote access, we've got online shopping, we've got prepackaged food. Next, please. We've got people saying that they're really interested in having different kinds of relationships with retailers. In the UK, we have a very high growth of online grocery shopping. So I can order my groceries online and they can get delivered to me. If that's starting to happen, could that delivery van not take back with it some of the things I no longer need? Or could it, in fact, rather than bringing potatoes in a plastic bag, have them in a basket in the back of the lorry and weigh out for me the amount of potatoes that I've ordered without any additional packaging? Lots of interesting questions about what's going to happen to the future of packaging when it's no longer so essential for protecting goods. And then again, we've got some problem packaging items, which if you press again, please, Melina, we start seeing around the place. In the bottom right-hand side, Tetra Pak, introduced in the 1950s, still not widely recyclable, but now somewhat recyclable. But that took 20, 30, 40 years before we got to that point. And there are some other things, black plastic trays, the infamous Pringles tube, and so on, where it's very hard to recycle these things, and we're effectively losing the resources embedded in them when we use them and throw them away. The next slide will show us some of the challenges from society, the kinds of things that people are interested in and want to know about. Organic and fair trade, what's the issues about food waste, how are we going to deal with packaging, what the issues around water use and so on and so forth. Lots of issues that people are expressing concern about. How can we address some of these through a more circular economy? And then the next slide. We have, of course, got already an economic model, already got business models, already got a way of doing business. We don't, if you look at the bubbles on the left-hand side, properly take into account in the cost of a product the various impacts that we're having on water and land and energy and air and biodiversity. We're worried about the profit, we're worried about the dividend perhaps, but we're not necessarily worried about the environmental and social impacts. And we don't have good feedback loops. On the top right-hand side, what I'm trying to show there is you make something, it goes to the shop, it gets sold, it gets used, it gets thrown away, but there's no feedback around that process that enables the manufacturer, or indeed forces the manufacturer, to care more about the efficiency or the recyclability or the reusability of his or her products. There are problems because of those vested interests. So, in order to address all of this, what do I think we need in this space? And the next slide just sets out some of the things I think that we need to do. We need government leadership. Some of the things that we need in this space can only be done by governments. Governments will only start taking this seriously if the media cares. In the UK, we've had a very significant shift over the last year or so in the attitude towards single-use plastic. And this has been driven in large part by concern about marine pollution, and that itself has been through media attention, which has been driven by NGO, non-governmental organisation activism. And increasingly we then see consumer pressure coming along, people not wanting to have single-use plastics, not wanting to have microbeads in their cosmetic products and so on and so forth. And so this is another important element that we need in all of it. And then the final and absolutely essential thing on this list, of course, is innovation by business. Innovation in the products to make them more resource efficient. Innovation in the business models. So, for example, selling light as a service rather than light bulbs. Selling clean clothes as a service rather than washing machines. All of these are models that can emerge, can deliver some of those big opportunities and benefits we saw earlier, and that are essential to underpin a more circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts.
It was very interesting indeed, and touching on many key aspects around the circular economy and the challenges around this. We will come back to Colin, so if any questions for Colin, do not forget you can send us your questions through the GoToWebinar software. We will now move on to hand over to our third speaker, Judd Austrian. Judd, can you hear us? I think you're muted.
Yes, I can hear it.
Hi,
Can
Judd.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Very quickly, some information about Judd. He's leading the IBM Global Center of Competence for Circular Economy, and he is a member of the IBM Industry Academy. The center is working closely with the IBM Global Asset Recovery Services to offer business and technology solutions towards a circular economy transformation. Judd has strategy and operational experience in manufacturing industries and later joined IBM as a consultant, advising various multinationals around business transformations. Judd, I know you don't have slides to go by, but we really look forward to your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. So happy to be sharing with you for the next 10 minutes our experience and learnings around this topic. I mean, I will be covering basically a couple of things, two main areas. One, to share with you internally at IBM, what do we do around the circular economy? The second one is the Global Center of Competence, where we actually, since about 2.5 years, designing solutions, mainly digital solutions, but also with the appropriate business models to enable circular economy at industry level. So the focus is electronics we started with, but then we moved to the construction industry, and I will share with you a couple of examples that hopefully will already show that there is value to be created. So first of all, I mean, at IBM, the topic is not really new. Whenever I'm speaking somewhere, I started by saying that actually since 25 years, we make money out of it. So at IBM, since more than 25 years, there is a unit called GARS, Global Asset Recovery Services. It has around $2 billion of revenue per year with very healthy profit margins. It's part of IGF, IBM Global Finance. We have a bank basically at IBM, which finances also certain buying for the expensive mainframes or servers. And actually, about 92% of the IT assets collected worldwide are either remanufactured, which is upgraded from N-1 to N technology, or refurbished and then sold again, remarketed again. And it's actually also part of our value proposition to protect an investment, because these life cycles are quite short, 3 to 5 years. So it's whenever somebody's paying millions of euros for an expensive mainframe, it's of course a better value proposition to suggest that it's easily upgradable in a short amount of time to the next level of technology. But beyond the refurbishment or remanufacturing, we also internalize our supply chain to some extent by actually harvesting components from the recovered products. And if you buy a new IBM product, you could have refurbished parts, and it's under the terms and conditions. And you as a client, you shouldn't care. You need just the IBM guarantee of performance on the product. The same is actually valid now that, since you probably know, we're moving away from hardware and more towards cloud services and cognitive services and data and analytics. So actually in the background, you could have refurbished machines or remanufactured machines, which are also running. You're again buying the performance. Finally, there is about 7.5% that is recycled material, and less than 0.5% goes to landfill. So of course, there's also, next to the business value, there's the environmental aspect that is also proving to be of quite high value as well. So this was the internal work on circular economy at IBM. We have done a 6-month project actually at the Center of Competence where I work. So I'm leading a team of about 5 people from different backgrounds, which also represents the challenges to enable circular economy. It's a system change. So we have people from supply chain, data science, advanced analytics, strategy, finance, and operations as well. And we work closely with our design team and engineering team to also learn about upgradability and ease of deconstruction of the product. But then we realized that actually construction is a very interesting area to tackle. It's an area which have about half of materials worldwide goes to construction. It's largely wasteful, and also it's actually quite tight margin industry, which has been for a long time searching for innovation in business model and ways to unlock value around that. So of course, we started looking into that, and so far we've been working on 2 projects. I will just share with you a few of them. But another important macro driver was the increased urbanization. You see that actually there's of course large movements towards cities. So besides the sheer big volume of people moving to cities, which means also more construction, there's the changing requirements. And our buildings by nature, our built environment is static, while if you look at the human needs, it's quite dynamic. So there is a gap here, or a misfit between the changing human needs throughout life cycles and also the static nature of building, where you need to demolish instead of repurposing the building, or having reversible designs of these buildings. So we're working on two projects. One is a more research and innovation project with the European Commission, with a consortium of various partners, and the project is entitled Buildings as Material Banks. And as the title says, how can you enable buildings to become material banks of the future? And the second one, we're working actually with Royal BAM, the largest construction company in the Netherlands, on designing circular and building a circularity building platform. So how can you enable in the future that professional buyers, which means an architect or an engineer or a project manager, to have visibility on the relevant data and the needed data to make a decision to buy secondhand instead of buying new? How can you replicate that environment of supply chain for new stuff? How can you replicate it for the environment of refurbished or used stuff? And that means you need to, of course, ensure the credibility of the information in terms of what is this product specification, but also other information like deconstruction profiles, as well as the maintenance history. And you can imagine this already entails integrating different data sets from different systems, which is already a challenge, because the moment you start putting an overload of information, you can discourage the buyers to actually bother about finding what they need. So we're trying to really capture the precise information needed of the product specs, the deconstruction, the maintenance history, but also the delivery time, because you need to also ensure, as you know, probably in building industry, you need to have a tight delivery date. So all these aspects is actually next to creating the building identity, we're trying to capture the demand as well. So you start actually matching supply and demand of what is available, what is going to be available in a refurbishment project, in a renovation project, and you can make it visible to a larger audience of potential buyers. And that's actually where you start after the stage, which we built in the first stage. We go to a more advanced stage of how can you automate the collection of this data from BIM systems and other types of systems to make as least as possible the manual filling of data. Actually, besides the technology solution, the platform, what is very interesting is the ecosystem buildup. So we start seeing that actually there's an interest from various stakeholders, and we are actually very much looking forward to attract the right stakeholders, because this will only be enabled by your unusual players, if you want. So we're working with a construction company, we're a digital company, but we start seeing interest from banks or from your demolition companies, which are becoming more waste management, to material providers. You see urban miners' role starting to emerge in the Netherlands as well. And you have as well your municipalities who are interested, like the region of Scotland is an example with the speaker before me. You see that cities are sometimes ahead of governmental at level, at country level, where they're also setting up their circular economy targets. And actually, each of these different stakeholders will generate some value. Construction companies could reduce their procurement costs through capturing reuse if they have the right information. Demolition companies can start putting their stuff also to be sold. Cities can also start having tenders where there's circular economy goals for every new tender for new buildings, for public buildings. You see banks who could adapt their value proposition towards their client. If you invest in a circular building, the residual value is actually improved. And this is where we're actually hoping to create that kind of ecosystem or coalition of the willing of the different players, and start showing a proof of value at system level, not just at one particular company level. Because it will only be enabled when you have these different stakeholders engaged and onboarded. So with that, I will leave it at this stage. I'm happy to take if there's any questions later on.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Judd, and thank you for bringing up the interesting topic of materials, specifically in the circular economy. We will come back with questions and answers after the last presentation. If I can just remind you to mute your phone. And last but not least, I would like to invite Brendon Edgerton to give us his thoughts on the topic. A bit of information about Brendon. He is the manager of circular economy at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in Geneva. And since arriving at the Council in 2015, he has managed the delivery of the Practitioner Guide to the Circular Economy and the 8 business cases to the circular economy. He has also contributed to the environmental priorities for business in the circular economy and the CEO Guide to the circular economy. Brendon, can you hear us?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Looks like should be able to click through here.
I think so. I think we're ready for you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, hello everyone. I think I'll start quickly by just jumping into what we do at the WBCSD. We are a CEO-led organization of around 200 forward-thinking companies. Our vision is to create a world where 9 billion people are living well within the means of the planet by 2050. And ultimately, we aim to do this by making more sustainable business more successful. So what you see up here are the approximately 200 member companies we have. You'll recognize many, if not most of the names there, mostly larger multinational companies that we work with. So what challenges are companies facing in this circular economy? It kind of depends on who you ask within business. I mean, similar to government organizations and NGOs and the public in general, you're going to see a spectrum of familiarity with the circular economy. And the business community is no different. Many of the challenges, most of the challenges we hear are around basic education and awareness, getting the concept and the idea of what the circular economy is out there, and allow people to start asking the simple questions. You look at finance and investment is another challenge that they face. Economic factors such as commodity prices, imports, exports. The change in how business is done is another significant hurdle that businesses face. And you can see, just going through the list here, they range across not only different departments within a company, but in the level of familiarity with the circular economy and expertise in the topic. And so as we saw these challenges prioritized based on the number of responses on a survey that we collected around the business community of what are your biggest challenges in the circular economy. And by prioritizing these different challenges and looking at them, we found a pretty clear pattern of where business overall is looking like they're at with respect to the circular economy. Most people are still trying to figure out what it is. And those that have moved on to the questions around what's the business case? How can I sell this internally, either to middle management or to the executives? Once you get this question addressed, obviously there's some implementation barriers that you're going to run into: change management, implementation, regulations, secondary material supply. And then only as you become more experienced within circular economy projects or initiatives, you then begin to think about who should I be collaborating with to take, say, this demonstration project or pilot to the next level. How should we be communicating about this project or our successes? And ultimately, one of the hottest topics that we're hearing about with the business community right now, particularly the pioneering companies, are how do we measure success? How do we understand what we're doing? And is it better than what we did last year? How does it compare to our industry peers? And ultimately, how are we contributing to the sustainable development goals that was brought up earlier? And so this is where we kind of begin to see the range of the spectrum of those working in the circular economy, from late adopters to the pioneer companies. believe the light as a service was brought up earlier, and using electronics and remanufacturing them to as new standards. You know, some of these companies like a Canon, a Philips, Renault, they've been thinking about circular, IBM obviously, they've been thinking about circular economy for a while. And so they're at the point now where they're able to communicate those successes, you know, to different objectives, but now we're trying to understand what is progress in circularity. How do we know what we're doing is for the better of the environment? How do we measure that? But then also, how do we compare? And so this is kind of the general pattern that we saw in the survey, is that you know, you have this distribution where there are many companies that are the followers and late adopters, and very few that have kind of stuck their neck out either at the product level, company level, or business line level to try something new. And that's what we see in this kind of general distribution. And so what we do as a WBCSD, we have programs across a number of environmental and social issues, and you know, looking at not just circular economy, but climate change and water, natural capital, cities. And what we want to do with the circular economy is get the conversation across our membership up to a certain level. And so we've, over the last 12 to 18 months, have released a number of publications trying to, one, get the circular economy on the agenda or on the mind of a lot of the executives and heads of sustainability that we work with. So we, you know, published, for example, a CEO guide to the circular economy, a very short, to the point, visual, easy read on what the circular economy is, why it's important to you as someone within business, and what are the first things you could do to get started. A little later on this year, we released the practitioner guide to the circular economy. It's a free website that outlines what you can do within an organization to move it towards a circular economy based on your organizational function. So whether you design, procure, manufacture, your marketing and selling, you dispose and handle the materials, or whether you're in finance, across those 6 categories, we have over 70 strategies, specific actionable strategies that you could take to move your company towards a circular economy. On that website, you'll also find a glossary and a general library of tools and resources across the spectrum of people and organizations who have contributed to the conversation, and we feel are seminal pieces of the circular economy discussion. So, you know, once we have shared that conversation of what the circular economy is, and tried to tailor our messages to specific people within the organization, we, you know, try and then begin to answer that next question: what is the business case? And so, reaching out to our member companies, we found these 8 different business cases across 3 categories of accelerating growth, enhancing competitiveness, and mitigating risk. And so you'll see here, companies are using the circular economy for one or more of these business cases or drivers based on you know, what industry they're in, geography, economic conditions. But you'll see here, it can create additional revenue from existing products, spur innovation on new products, reducing operating costs. It can enhance customer and employee relationships. You can distinguish yourself from competition. And one of the more impressive ones we're seeing now is using the circular economy to develop the corporate strategy. For example, you have typically called waste management companies calling themselves resource management companies, and trying to embrace the concept and use it to their strategic advantage at the corporate level. And then lastly, under mitigating risk is trying to address your linear risk exposure, and then adapting business models and value chain relationships to the changing circumstances. And so, you know, once you answer what it is and you know, what the business case is, obviously these are general documents, and the idea is that we then begin to carry the conversation on in more depth individually within the companies or through more specific projects. But ultimately, it's up to the company to implement. And so there are a number of tools and platforms available for people to begin to address certain challenges that they face with respect to the circular economy. And one of these very effective platforms is Manufacturing 2030. It was launched actually earlier this year. It already has over 500 members from diverse industries across food and drink, automotive, chemicals, retail, etc. But the ultimate idea is that it creates peer collaboration between companies to drive change. And so what you'll see up there on the right-hand side of the slide is someone who works within a pharmaceuticals company on the floor has a question of what they can do with their baby powder and talc that they have sitting in containers. And there were a number of other professionals from around the world and different industries and companies of giving recommendations or ideas of what they can consider doing with it and who else might be interested. So it's a very, very neat platform for really beginning to implement the circular economy. So I'll stop there, but excited to get to the question and answer part.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Brendon, for the presentation. So Can you hear me? Yeah. So we've received quite a lot of questions from the audience that I've been trying to kind of collate and make sense and kind of put them together. I've unmuted all the panelists now. Judd, I hope you've unmuted your phone as well. I guess the first question to the panel is, well, there are questions around the attitude of businesses. So businesses are changing towards a more circular economy. At least this is what we tend to hear. But how mature is this industry actually? And what is the most effective catalyst, if you want, in terms of moving companies towards a circular economy? And if I hopefully don't put too much in this question, we also had a question from the audience in terms of the role of investors. So what is the business, the private industry doing? How mature is it? And what is motivating them, and eventually what is motivating investors? What is the drive for investors to actually put their money, if you want, into circular economy? I don't know, Louise, would you like to go first?
Yes, I'm happy to go first. I mean, I think it's a good question. There are obviously a number of businesses who are interested and who see the value in the circular economy, but I think Brendon summed it up quite well on that last slide around the motivations for business. And I think unless businesses understand the motivation from a business perspective, they're unlikely to change. So, I mean, one of the challenges we have is making that case and being able to demonstrate what the business benefits are, and it will be different for every business. So I think that's the critical thing. I think Brendon kind of highlighted the 8 areas that businesses are interested in. And interestingly, from an investor point of view, again, investors, I think, know very little about the circular economy at the moment, but certainly listening to some kind of pension schemes, investors, they're very keen to invest in sustainable companies going forward, and they recognise that companies that think about the environment and think about long-term sustainability are likely to be the most successful companies in the long run. So investors are increasingly interested in that, although I do think their awareness of the circular economy per se is probably limited.
Colin, would you have something to add?
Not a huge amount. I think between Brendon and Louise, they've covered it. And you do see good examples of companies out there who are making money out of a more circular approach. I mean, the classic that people talk about for a long time is Rolls-Royce aerospace engines, which they no longer sell. They sell airtime, if you like, and they keep the machines themselves. A very circular model. But there are lots of other examples, large and small. But it is very specific to an individual. I think the question, I think, is really whether the benefits that companies can realise are yet great enough because of the problems in terms of the failure to take into account externalities and the vested interest in current business models and so on and so forth, whether those barriers are too great to get widespread take-up. And I think that's the leading edge, the cutting edge, the thinking people, the progressive people, the kind of people that both Brendon and Judd were talking about, yes, they're in that space, but there's an awful lot of businesses that aren't yet. The challenge for us all is how do we get more businesses into that space?
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Colin. Jan, how about you?
Yeah, so there are industries which are indeed at a different maturity level to tackle that. So you see, when you look at more expensive product, higher end types of product, there's more incentive to design them for upgradability. And that became part of the differentiation in the value proposition. Like I talked about, the more expensive mainframes. Well, if you look at the laptop, which is relatively cheap, there's less incentive to design for upgradability, and this is why you end up having all resold for once after being refurbished, and all recycled, which is a lower value, which we, of course, the aim is to try to use at product level. But you see that other industries' incentives is actually to try to create new sources of business value. It can be reducing your procurement cost, can be increasing residual value of your product itself, or actually enhancing your current value proposition, like I mentioned for the bank, which is also looking into how you can adapt mortgage or interest rates, for example, depending on where do you invest in what type of buildings, which will protect their investment on the longer run, and also get more value from the parts that are generated. And very briefly on the investor, I think we still need to have that case from the there's lots of talk around the trillions, which is the higher level macro studies. It's very important to get that kind of what's in it for me, for a company or for a small group of a small ecosystem. And this is where often becomes the more challenge, which is important to also provide at company level or at small ecosystem level.
Brilliant, thank you, Judd. Brendon, I know your fellow panelists have eventually directed this question back to you in your presentation. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, it's a very good point that Judd just made. One of the biggest challenges was companies trying to understand, what these macroeconomic numbers really mean to them, even what they mean to their industry. And so that's something that we're trying to help them through. But it is a significant challenge in getting buy-in from the C-suite. And when you're talking of really driving a multinational business, then what you're looking for there is the buy-in and the drive and push from the executives, and that's where we've seen most of the really step change in moving towards a circular economy, is when the CEO has got hold of this idea and told everyone to run with it. So it's something that's very important to try and get in any organization.
Brilliant. All right. I think, and to be honest, the majority of the questions we are receiving are around the motivation for the private sector to actually be a bit more active in terms of their sustainability efforts. And I know we've talked about generally the motivation for the businesses. In terms of the partnership, if you want, and the collaboration between governments and the private sector, there is some debate around whether governments need to drive the move to circular economy, or whether the private sector eventually should be kind of leading this and be allowed to operate in a more free way. Shall we start the other way around this time? Brendon, I don't know what your thoughts would be on that.
I'm sorry, on which part?
So essentially, it's around the debate on whether government should be driving the move to the circular economy, or whether the private sector should be operating in a more free way.
Well, I think there's responsibility on both sides to drive it, and I think that the most critical part is the more discussion and open conversation we could have between the two groups, the easier it'll be. But I think that those types of hurdles are slowly coming down. There's more and more discussion that we're seeing between the private sector and public sector, but there is a huge role for each of those sectors to play in making sure that the other group has the right structure and incentives and motivation to move things towards circularity.
All right, brilliant. Judd, what do you think about this debate?
Yeah, so I think definitely, so I agree, both have responsibility. from our experience, you see that government actually can have a big role into accelerating that transition. You will always have that group of private sector which is still waiting or suspicious or not recognizing the value for different reasons. And these are, when you start setting up boundaries at city level or country level, for example, banning landfill or circular economy targets, this will already start having some of these executives actually looking for what's happening there. So you will always have this group of companies still waiting for that. On the other side, I think government can set a very clear example. So, for example, with the public procurement, when we look at construction, one of the examples could be why not have for every new project that is being initiated in government buildings to have a circular economy criteria, which needs to be also defined with experts. What does it mean to have a circular city? And how can you achieve that? And by which year? And you only win the tender when you're also abiding to certain criteria and have these criteria actually, you will have just suddenly new business models generated to meet these kind of criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, you've spent quite some time around policy and the government. What's your take on that?
I think you can probably think about businesses in general in, let's say, 4 broad categories. You've got cutting edge businesses, pioneers who are making the change for one reason or another and really making a go of it. And I think what you see is government watches those people. Government sees what's happening there and is interested, perhaps even inspired. Then you've got what you might call the next level of early movers. They're not inventing the ideas, but they're adopting them much faster than the rest of the sector or the general economy. And these are the people that governments often use as role models and start talking about, well, look, these people are doing it, so perhaps we should bring in some kind of policy to support what they're doing because the results of what they're doing are really positive. And then you switch, I think, from that leadership by the private sector to leadership by the public sector, because the next stage is government brings in those policy requirements that effectively encourage or perhaps a little bit force the vast majority of businesses to start thinking in that way, to start developing in that way. And then you get into the space where you've got the laggards, the people who just have not got the message. And that's where enforcement action and police action, if you like, to stop them from doing what is now the wrong thing and get them to do the right thing comes into play. And I think you can see that starting to happen in the circular economy space. And I reckon that we're somewhere around that second phase where the early movers are starting to adopt it and government's starting to talk about there's some really good stuff here. We ought to think about supporting, encouraging and incentivizing that going forward.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you, Colin. Louise, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, much the same as already been said by the other 3, really, that I think there is a role for both. I do think there is a role for government, particularly in setting that vision and ideal and kind of leading. And, you know, certainly from the experience in Scotland, that has been happening, supported with some funding as well for smaller businesses. And that is beginning to have, I think, a bit of an effect on the market in Scotland. So yeah, I think there's role for both. I think generally it is a business-led activity, and it should be so. But there's a lot that government can do to make sure that does actually happen.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes only, possibly for the last question. I think for the last questions, since we've talked about and the title, if you want, of the webinar, we're looking at producers, we're looking at the government, but we're also looking at what consumers are doing and how they're thinking within the circular economy industry, if you want. I know most of you alluded to the role of the consumer within that economy. Colin, you talked specifically about the consumer pressure during your presentation, so maybe we can start possibly with your thoughts. But essentially what I'm looking for is what can private and business and what generally needs to be done so actually consumers do eventually prefer to buy the possibly more expensive product that is actually though related with a sustainable production and kind of background. How can we incentivize the consumers further to make that behavioral change, if you want?
There's quite a lot of work being done looking at how much purchasing decisions can be influenced by sustainability issues or other moral and ethical issues. And consistently you find that no more than a quarter of us actually really make purchasing decisions based on those wider issues. And the vast majority of us use other things to make those decisions, price being a very important element of it, brand recognition being another. And so I think that what flows from that is that in terms of the individual purchasing decision in the shop or on the internet, you can't really rely on customers to, quotes, do the right thing, unquotes. And I put that in quotes mark because it is quite a subjective question.
Yeah.
And so you have to, I think, do what people call choice editing. So one of the things that you can see more happening is people choosing to shop with a particular brand because it allows them to delegate their ethical decision-making process to that brand. A good example in retail in the UK is Marks and Spencer's. It's quite an expensive food retailer, and I'm talking about it in the context of food retail now, but partly its success comes from the fact that indeed many people believe, know, hope, expect that Marks and Spencer's will do the right thing all the time, and therefore if I only buy my food from Marks and Spencer's, I don't have to make those individual decisions. So you get that sort of thing. But also, this again comes to the role of government, minimum standards. In the European Union, we've had a program over the last few years of increasing the energy efficiency of electrical and electronic equipment. The minimum energy efficiency that you need to demonstrate for a particular piece of kit in order to put it on the market, that's editing the choice of consumers. You have to buy that piece of kit or one that's as good as that piece of kit because you can't buy the other kind of stuff. So yes, there is stuff about awareness, there is stuff about getting people excited. I think where that plays the biggest role, though, is in raising that public attention, getting the media attention, getting the public dialogue, rather than the individual purchasing decision on a day-to-day basis, which we know is really hard to impact through sustainability issues.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, Colin. Louise, I don't know whether you want to give us your thoughts next, and we do have specific questions from the audience based on your presentation. We actually have a question that you might want to address very, very briefly, if you may, around the Elizabeth Martin tweet and what eventually happens to the products. Are they leased again? Are they recycled?
Yes, well, yeah, just tackling that one. The model was very much about leasing them again. So that was clothing that was made to last, high quality, robust clothing. So it would be leased, and then it would come back and be cleaned and leased again. So like a wedding dress type leasing service. To answer the more general question, I mean, I think my general view is that if the products and services are produced at that are attractive to consumers, then consumers will purchase them or lease them or whatever and make the right decision. So I agree with Colin really that they won't do it for ethical reasons necessarily, although some will, but the majority of people based around the product, the attractiveness of the cost. And I think, there's a couple of good examples in the UK. We used to buy our cars either by saving up or having some sort of hire purchase type scheme, and now we've moved significantly towards these personal contract plans because they're convenient and they suit consumers, and almost that's a bit like a circular model, except the cars aren't particularly built with that in mind. So, it shows that there has been a shift in behaviours because it's been an attractive kind of purchasing model that's been provided to the consumers. So I think if we got that right, then you would see consumers taking it up.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Louise. Judd, I don't know what your thoughts are on how to incentivize consumers.
I think it's still the value needs to be captured for the consumer. Of course, there is the aspect of brand of awareness on sustainability, and we're seeing actually this growing more and more. But it still needs to be reflected in a way or the other in the traditional way of perceiving value. So the fact of paying more because it's sustainable on its own this will not really scale it up. We are working actually more around the business to business, which of course another type of engagement. When it talks about construction, it's a professional type of buying. We also, for example, need to reflect, and there are actually success examples so far with the pilots we're working on of it that is cheaper. So when you are able to leverage, but it has to be with the right quality, because cheaper on its own is not enough. It has to also reflect the traditional needs and requirements that it's still high quality product, otherwise not buy. So that's at least from my perspective.
Brilliant. And Brendon, last but not least, of course, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just echo if you can deliver the same product with the same quality and specifications at a price that is the same or lower, then that's the most effective way to engage a customer.
Very straightforward. Brilliant. So I'd like to thank once again the speakers for taking the time to prepare the presentations and dedicating the time during their day to come and share their experiences with our listeners. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you very much to all of our listeners. And as a reminder, we are recording the webinar and we will email it to you shortly so you can listen again, maybe follow up on any questions and share with your peers, of course. Our next webinar is on the 4th of October and we'll keep you posted, and we'll speak to you soon again. Bye.